So let's look at 1 Kings chapter 19. We'll be looking at 1 Kings chapter 19. And the first set of verses we're going to be looking at is from verse 1 through the beginning of verse 9. So there's a section here. 1 Kings chapter 19 from verse 1 through the beginning of verse 9. All right, let's look at 1 Kings chapter 19 and from verse 1. It says, "Now Ahab told Jezreel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. And so Jezreel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, 'May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them.' Elijah was afraid and ran for his life, and when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servants there. While he himself went a day's journey into the desert, he came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. 'I have had enough, Lord,' he said. 'Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors.' Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, 'Get up and eat.' He looked around, and there by his head was a cake of bread baked over the hot coals and a jar of water. And he ate and drank, and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back a second time and touched him and said, 'Get up and eat, for the journey is too much for you.' So he got up and ate and drank, and strengthened by that food, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into a cave and spent the night." And the title of today's message, we're going to see this later. It's in one of the verses later on. It is the 7,000 who have not bowed down to Baal. Right, the 7,000 who have not bowed down to Baal. So we're going to look at that a little bit later. That will be the title, but we want to look at the context first. Who is Elijah? The great prophet in the Old Testament. If Moses is the great priest, we have Elijah, the great prophet. And Elijah's ministry, to be this great prophet, Elijah's ministry came at a time that was most difficult. It's not as if he was the great prophet, but it was like an easy time, like it was a time of glory for Israel or anything like that. But in fact, to be the great prophet in the Old Testament, it came at one of the most difficult times in the Israelite nation, just as I would say that Moses, being the great priest, also came at a time of enslavement for the Israelite nation. We see that this great person came out during a very difficult time, right? And so Elijah was doing ministry, in particular in the northern part of Israel, where there was depraved and secular kings, and they were mixing with the world. There was so much idolatry. And that's what's going on here as well, too. Elijah is being chased by Jezebel, a wicked queen. Right? A very, very wicked queen at the time, Jezebel. And so, the Jezebel is the queen of King Ahab. We saw him last time. And so, in particular, this Jezebel tried to institute, idol worship throughout the whole nation. And we saw that last time. It was Baal, right? Do we remember the idol Baal? This is the god of fertility. This was an idol, a god of fertility. And then so, what we said last time is that if we look at what that means, like if we were to apply that to our lives, it's the same. We, in this era as well, too, you look at society and we do worship the idol Baal. Maybe not in the same form that they did back then, but, you look at it now on social media and on the internet, it's all the sexualization of culture and society. And, the sexual immorality they had for this towards this god of fertility long ago, it's the same sexual immorality we have now, and we are worshiping these idols, right? And so, if you look at what Jezebel did, all the people of the Lord, right, all the people of God, right, she slaughtered all the priests and the prophets and whatnot, and so just chasing Elijah. Elijah's like the only one left, the only prophet left, right? Everyone has been slaughtered by this Jezebel, this Queen Jezebel, and she is chasing after Elijah here. That's what this scene is here. Even after last time we read that Elijah prayed to end the drought, he's the one that won that competition between, the prophets of Baal and, Elijah, the prophet of the Lord or God. But still, after all of that, here Elijah's still alone. This is how difficult this time was for Elijah, that no matter what he did, no matter what power of the Lord he even shown here, Jezebel was chasing after Elijah, and here he is left alone again, in the wilderness. I mean, this is a story, a refrain that we keep on seeing in the story of Elijah, that he is the prophet that is so very lonely, right? He is alone in the wilderness, and you can imagine being chased over and over and over again, right? I mean, for us, sometimes, maybe we have one lonely moment in our life where it becomes difficult and hard, but imagining this happen over and over and over again, this is, what happened to Elijah, right? And so he is alone in the wilderness, he's very tired, and more than actually physical tiredness, we clearly see that, it's impacting his heart, it's impacting his spirit. And that's what happens to us too. We can become physically tired in the world. There's a lot of things that are, on my plate. I've got a lot of things to do with work and study and family and so on and so forth. There are so many things on my plate, but, actually, if it was just handling it physically, we might think, well, I can handle it. I'm young, I can handle it, it's okay. But the hard part is the spiritual, emotional, mental drain that it has on our hearts. And we can see that clearly through Elijah, right? Elijah, he is feeling fear, anxiety, and depression. This is very real. Actually, when you look at this story of Elijah, it's so real, right? I mean, it says in verse 3, it says, Elijah was afraid. He ran for his life. That's how he is feeling, right? And he comes under this broom tree, and then he says, oh, I'm just going to die. I think we've all said that before, at the end of a long day, it's over for me, this kind of thing, right? I've had enough, Lord, is what he says, right? This is in verse 4, I've had enough, Lord. And, how many times have we said that too? I've had enough. I've had enough of all of this. Take my life, I'm no better than my ancestors. He is just so exhausted, physically, spiritually, mentally, emotionally, at all, and he just sort of collapses here. And, I think this exact thing that is happening to Elijah is exactly what happens to us. We come to be in spiritual crisis, right? I mean, this is the real story of a real person. A verse we read last time, the Apostle James says Elijah was a man just like us. There's a Bible verse that says this, right? The Apostle James is saying this in his letter. He says, Elijah was a man just like us. And so he's a person just like we all are. And just like this great prophet, I mean, we look at him as a great prophet. And ordinarily, if we were to look at this great prophet during this difficult time, our imagination, I think it's because of Hollywood or something like that, is some superhero, like that, someone different from us, but it's not like that. He is exactly like us. Elijah was a person just like us, and the Bible records the realness of this prophet, that he is in spiritual crisis. And that he's in spiritual crisis even though he is the person who is good. He's a good person, right? I mean, he's a good person standing for God's goodness, God's righteousness, God's truth, right? He is standing for the Spirit of Jesus Christ our Lord, right? This is the same suffering that Jesus Christ our Lord stood for, right? He was the one who was all goodness and truth and righteousness. That is Jesus Christ our Lord. And he stood alone in the world, in a depraved world where we were all sinners, right? And that is the same as Elijah. He is standing there, as the good, righteous one in this era, but, he's still facing this. I mean, have you ever felt this? I am doing good things. I'm a good person. I'm doing good things. I'm standing, my intention, my heart, and everything I'm doing is good. But then everything around me seems to be crumbling, and it's hard and it's difficult. I think that's how Elijah felt, right? That I can do good, I can be good, right? I can stand for God's righteousness, but, I'm still facing difficulty, O Lord. Why? Why is it that I am still facing difficulty, O Lord, during this time? Right? And that is exactly what Elijah is feeling. And so, for me, sometimes I feel this. A couple days ago, a few of us went evangelizing, up on campus. And that's what happens, when you evangelize. You can walk around campus. There's some of these campuses I've been on. Or local campus here, University of San Francisco, is pretty good. People are pretty nice. They'll actually stop and talk. But you could walk a whole hour, on some other campuses, like approaching people, and they'll just like, bye-bye. They don't want to talk. Go away. I don't want to talk to you. And so you can go the whole hour and not even be able to speak to one person. This is how it is on some of these campuses. And so, it feels lonely, right? You're like sitting in this like huge, gigantic campus, and then you kind of wonder, who stands for God at this place? We can be here in San Francisco. This city here that we are in San Francisco. This weekend, coming week, we're getting like, how many people? There's like, they say 20, 30,000 people are coming into this city this week. And so, it's a big city, an international city, but you can feel like that even in this city and in this world. It's like, who really actually stands for God in this place? And so, still, if you keep going, right, in faith. We have to keep going. Even if you're going on campus, you keep going. And this has happened to me before. I'm evangelizing, and then no one talks to you, and no one says, like, they don't want to talk to you, right? But then the last minute, you're about to give up, and the last minute you talk to someone and say, I want to study the Bible. I want to learn about it. Let me... here's my phone number, and let's set a time, something like that. And then, even if you were despairing like this whole time, you feel like a very great comfort, at the end. Like even if it's just one person, like it was all worth it, right? I walked around for like hours even, and just one person. And I think that's how God is. God, He, more than actually the action, like we sometimes think in that way, like, how many people did I get? Did I get 0 people, or 1 person, or 10 people, or 20 people, or something like that? But, in actuality, it's all by grace. God is the one who does it and guides it by His sovereignty. So, where's the fruit? The fruit is actually in my heart. The fruit is the maturity and the heart that God has developed in me as I overcame, right? And so, the difficulties, we can see that in the difficulties in life as well, too. You might think, well, I'm just like struggling here. Like I've got so much on my plate. I'm in spiritual crisis and it's very difficult. There's all these things on my life. And even as I'm progressing in them, it doesn't even seem like I'm doing much. I'm not getting anywhere. Like, am I even taking a step forward even? But, still, even at those moments, God, He is with us, right? And it's our heart that is developing. Here He is maturing us even during those times. And so, I think that's what's happening to Elijah here. He is desperately lonely. It's a really wretched time. There's like no one, and then he's done it over and over and over again. We're reading one of the, this is the last message we're going to do on Elijah. We've read over and over again how lonely he is. He is desperately lonely. I've had enough. Take my life. But, still, he takes rest. Sometimes that's what we need. We need to take rest. And then, God is still there at that place. Even at the most lonely place, at the desperately lonely place, God provides an angel here, right? And so, it records here how, this angel brought comfort. There's some food and water, given to Elijah. As, he just basically passed out. He's so desperately lonely and tired. He passes out under this tree. But, that same place where he is at is the same place that God provides him that comfort, right? So he wakes up, he sees this food and water nearby. This place, I think it became a very, very important place for Elijah. It says it's a broom tree is what it's called. That's in verse 4, right? He came to a broom tree. So in Hebrew, this word broom, this broom tree, this broom bush is called a Rodem tree. right? A Rodem tree. So this name, this word, this Hebrew word Rodem comes out. And so at the Rodem tree, God, he rejuvenates Elijah's spirit, and then, it's amazing. Like, at first he was like, take my life, it's over, right? But then, a little comfort comes to him, from God underneath this Rodem tree. He sets renewed determination. And then it clearly records, the Lord told him, get up and eat for the journey. He get up, and so he got up, ate and drank, and then it says he traveled 40 days and 40 nights, right? In verse 8, he traveled 40 days and 40 nights. He goes to Horeb, right? The Mount Horeb. So what is this? This is in Exodus. This is where Moses received the Ten Commandments, the 2 stone tablets and the 10 Commandments. So he goes to that place, right? That same place as Moses, once again. And so, being rejuvenated, renewed. I mean, he was like so desperately lonely, take my life, but just a little bit of food, a little bit of water and comfort from God, it rejuvenates him, like that. And what is that? That is how God rejuvenates us. It's actually more than like physically. I mean, I'm sure the physical food and water helped Elijah, but it was the spirit. It was like knowing that, actually God still provides grace. Like if I search for it and I find it and I really look around me, that it seems like it's like a very, very difficult time, but, like that those little moments of grace, become a great comfort, right? And that's how God's grace is. God's grace comes when we need it most, right? It comes from, comes when we're alone. He might provide us with something like a little bit of a sign. It might come from other people too. We have brothers and sisters here. I think that's why church is important. Like, we're all sinners and we're all desperately lonely, like Elijah inside of this world. But, we come to a place like this and on church on Sunday, and, we can be with each other. We can understand one another, and even through another person, I can receive God's grace. And that's how God's provision is. Right? I remember a time when I was a young pastor, young in ministry, and it was very hard. It was like, no money, no, everything was difficult, and then, one of my senior pastors, who walked ahead of me, they took me out to eat, and then bought me like this big, huge meal. Gigantic meal like this, and then, just eating with them and being comforted like that, it brightened my day. I was very happy, and it rejuvenated me like that. I mean, it's not as if my problem was solved. I eat a nice meal, and all the problems, all the issues I was having at that time were completely solved. But, sometimes that's what you need. You need a little bit of comfort from God, comfort from the people around you, our brothers and sisters around us. That's the strength to keep on going, right? Even when we feel like desperate and we're alone, we need that comfort to keep on going. And so that's what we read here in Elijah. He walks 40 days and 40 nights, and then he reaches Horeb. And then what happens? So let's read the end of verse 9 up until verse 18. So 1 Kings chapter 19. From the end of verse 9 until verse 18. It says, "And the word of the Lord came to him, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' He replied, 'I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword. And I am the only one left, and now they are trying to kill me too.' The Lord said, 'Go out and stand on the mountain in the presence of the Lord, for the Lord is about to pass by.' Then a great and powerful wind tore the mountains apart and shattered the rocks before the Lord, but the Lord was not in the wind. And after the wind there was an earthquake, but the Lord was not in the earthquake. And after the earthquake came a fire, but the Lord was not in the fire. And after fire came a gentle whisper. And when Elijah heard it, he put his cloak over his face and went out and stood at the mouth of the cave. Then the voice said to him, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?' He replied, 'I have been very zealous for the Lord God Almighty. The Israelites have rejected your covenant, broken down your altars, and put your prophets to death with the sword, and I'm the only one left. And now they are trying to kill me too.' The Lord said to him, 'Go back the way you came and go to the desert of Damascus, and when you get there, anoint Hazael king over Aram. Also anoint Jehu son of Nimshi king over Israel, and anoint Elisha son of Shaphat from Abel the Meloha to succeed you as a prophet. Jehu will put to death anyone who escapes the sword of Hazael, and Elisha will put to death anyone who escapes the sword of Jehu. Yet I reserve 7,000 in Israel, all those whose knees have not bowed down to Baal, and all whose mouths have not kissed him. So, going to Mount Horeb, right? And then, what happens? The Lord tells them, stand at this mountain and then wait for the Lord to come, right? Stand at this mountain and wait for the Lord to come. And then what happens is a huge, powerful wind comes by, and Elijah must have been looking. It's like, a huge wind comes by. Is the Lord there? And then suddenly the earth shakes, right? So imagine that you're sitting there, the earth shakes, right? I mean, I guess we get that in California a lot. And then, is that God? Is God speaking through this earthquake? And then a huge fire passes by, and it's like, is that God? But, none of those places, right? I mean, the wind, the huge wind, and the earthquake, and the fire all pass by, but the Lord is not in that place. And so then finally, how does the voice of the Lord come? It says in a whisper. And in a gentle whisper, the Lord came. So, it's like that. I mean, normally we say to God, like, show me a sign. It's so desperately hard. It's very lonely, Lord. Show me a sign. Show me a sign that I need to keep going and that, I really, really need to follow your will and your path. Show me a sign. And then very often the sign we're looking for a huge sign, right? We're looking, it says Hollywood, like we want to see like that big of a sign, that kind of sign, like show it to me, right? Show me in a big wind or an earthquake or a fire, or show me like that. But, it's not in those places, right? It's not in it's not as God like just shakes us with an earthquake or like burns us with a fire or something like that. I mean, sometimes when God reaches us and speaks to us, it's a very soft power. It's a very soft power. And I think, when you really think about it, that is very understandable, right? I mean, God is, of course, the Almighty God. I mean, if He wanted to, He could speak to us in a wind or in a fire or in an earthquake. He could do those things. But, what does the Bible also teach us? The Bible also teaches us that God is love, right? And so, because God is love, we come to understand there's also this soft power, right? There's this warm power that comes to us in a soft way. That actually when life is chaotic and I feel crazy about all the things happening to me, I've had those times before. I think this was my 4th year in college. I took 5 classes. I mean, you guys in college know how hard that is. I mean, taking 5 classes at once. I worked, I think I had a job. I was working part-time, like 15 hours a week. And, there was church. I was heavily involved in church at the time, and as a Bible teacher. I was doing that as well too, and evangelizing, teaching the Bible, those kind of things. And so, it was like chaotic. Like my schedule was so packed. Everything, every single minute, an hour of the day was packed. From morning until evening, it was like that. And then, sometimes what we want and what we expect of God is, God, you're the one that needs to cut through all that chaos, right? Like I have this huge chaos in my life, and since you're the big God, if you really want me to follow your will and do something, then you need to cut through all the chaos, right? And so we usually expect it in a big way that He's going to bulldoze, right through that chaos and work in some ways through that. But actually, that the way that God cuts through all that chaos is not in some huge way bulldozing through all of that chaos, but, he goes straight to the heart. Right? He goes in a soft whisper, and He goes straight to the heart. Right? And that's where we have to really find God. Right? That's where we really have to be in touch with God. And that's how Jesus is as well also, this relationship that we have with Jesus. Is that Jesus, He didn't come to us in like a huge, gigantic way, but what is this walk? We're walking towards Christmas soon. It's just a little over a month away, I think almost 40 days away or so. And so, walking towards, Christmas, how did Jesus come? We always learn during Christmas that he didn't come Jesus didn't come like bulldozing his way onto this earth, but he was born in a manger. Right? He was born in a manger, and then he bore the cross for us. This wretched cross, this ugly cross, right? And he spoke to us in that way, in our hearts, deep in our hearts in that way, through that cross. And so, this gentle whisper that came to Elijah, it comes to us now. It speaks to us now. And so what kind of message comes, right, at the time? And so what we read is that the message that comes to Elijah in that gentle whisper is to say, hey, there's going to be a new history. Like there's all these depraved people. There is this depraved thing that is happening throughout all of Israel, Jezebel and Ahab and all of them. Right? All the people who have, fallen into that idolatry, but, we're going to choose new people, right? We're going to choose new ones. And so, in particular, you can read the history later on of Israel if you're interested, but Jehu is very important, right? Jehu was a very important king, and Elisha was a very, very important prophet, right? So there's Jehu and Elisha. And so, it's true. There is something like this. There's always a way forward, right? There is God does have a plan. It's like we think that the world is just the way the world is, and the world can never change, right? I mean, that's very, very often. You read the news, you go online and you read the news, and then everything's like happening all around the world, and it seems like it's wretched, and there's no solution for it, right? But what we need to know is God is bigger than this world. Even if this world, it seems like there's no way forward, God is bigger than the world. So if God is bigger than the world, then there's always a way forward. And so we have to understand that this is God's sovereign plan, that there's always a way forward. That it seemed like death was completely impacting this world, and there was sin, and there was wretchedness, and then, how can there be a way forward? But then he sent his one and only Son, Jesus Christ, and he bore the cross for all of us. And so there was a way forward. There was a way forward even amidst the complete depravity and sin inside of the world. There was a way forward through his Son, Jesus Christ. And so, of course, God, if he did it through Jesus and he did it at the time, of these evil, wicked rulers during the time of Elijah, then wouldn't there be, a way forward during this time? I mean, do you think that just because there's these evil, wretched kings out there in the world, during the time of Elijah, you look at this world and you think just because there's all this wickedness and there's all this scandals and scum and all these kinds of depraved sin in the world, there, whether it be in the government or in business or in society and everything, and it's just like this in the world, and you think that it's just gonna. God, the great God is just going to give up? These people are too powerful for me. Is that how God is? The wicked governments of the world and the wicked businesses of the world, and then the God is just going to say, I give up. These people are too powerful for me. But, that's kind of how we are, right? We often fall into despair in the world, thinking, everything is just bad, and so it's just too much for me. But that's not God. Right? God does, God, of course, God's righteous plan is not going to fail just because of some, people. Right? I mean, there's just some people out there. Think about it. Actually, we look at this era, but this era, what we're seeing now, has happened over and over and over again. There were past countries and past societies and civilizations and past powerful people with all of their wickedness. And do you think that it just ended, the world ended just because of them? It did not. It did not. There were times, weren't there times in the past where the whole world could have been destroyed? I think there were. We look at it now and we look at all the evil weapons and the wars and everything that's going on. It's the world can just end. But, think about it long ago. There were these times. Is it just now? There were times in the past when there were wicked, evil rulers, out there. And they seemingly had the power somehow even to kill everybody on this earth. It was possible even back then, But, do you think God would allow that? God, he doesn't. God doesn't allow those things. Actually, man's power cannot compare to God's power. That's what we have to conclusively understand. God, looking at these people, like these powerful people like that, God's righteous plan would not fail just because of some evil rulers like that. God never fails. He is perfect. It's always us and our sin that deviate. God will find a new and bigger history. And so what does he do? He calls Elijah once again to rejuvenate him. And maybe Elijah's feeling tired because, he's done this over and over and over again in his life. He's getting older and he's been doing this again and again and again in his life. But, what does God do? He calls 3 times, the people. There's this, Hazael and Jehu and Elisha. There's 3 times more. So if it was just one person before, there was now 3 times the people, that are going to help now, right? And so it's actually a big improvement, when you think about it, from 1 to 3 times more. And it isn't just them, actually. God, he knows. He knows that there's people that have not bowed down to Baal. In fact, he says there are 7,000 who have not bowed down to Baal. Elijah seemed lonely throughout this whole time, but in fact, there was 7,000 who did not bow down to Baal. They secretly stood righteous. This is actually something very amazing when you think about it. It seems like everybody else in the world is entrenched in sin and we are lonely, but there are actually 7,000 remaining. Many more people than we actually think. You go around this city and you think, really, how many people really believe in God? But, there are more than we think. Let's look at Romans chapter 11, and in verse 2 through 5. Romans chapter 11, and in verse 2 through 5. So Paul speaks about Elijah here. Romans chapter 11, and in verse 2 through 5. In verse 2 it says, God did not reject his people whom he foreknew. Don't you know what the scripture says in the passage about Elijah, how he appealed to God against Israel? Lord, they have killed your prophets and torn down your altars. I am the only one left, and they are trying to kill me. And what was God's answer to them? I have reserved for myself 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. So, too, at the present time, there is a remnant chosen by grace. So it's talking about the same exact scene that we just read, right? And so there are 7,000 who have not bowed down to Baal. And how does Paul interpret that? He says that they are the remnant, right? They are the remaining ones. And so the remaining ones, the ones who haven't, who are still righteous, that they have stayed pure and they are still righteous before God, relying on God, having faith in God, that is righteousness. And that's many more than we actually think, right? Inside of this world, it seems that everybody is caught up in the sexual immorality and the celebrities and the traps of the social media and the world of greed and the world of power. Politics and business and all of that. But that's not all, right? It's not that everybody has fallen in. There are many people out there who see through all the junk and the fake things in the world. There's so many fake things in the world. There are people that exactly see that it's all fake. It's not real. Like everything that we're reading, in the news and all of those things, it's not real. It's all fake. And there's people that see this about what the true world of God is, his true goodness and righteousness and all these fake things, and it shouldn't be like that, right? And so what must we do? What must Elijah and Elisha and Jehu and all these people do that have been called by God? We need to find these 7,000. We need to find the 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal. And we need to gain strength from one another. It means that even at this place, even at our church, in this place near the campus and in the city of San Francisco, there are people around us. There are people around us that we should find. And so, really, I must find those people and, I must be with those people, right? We must gain strength from one another and be with those people. Actually, we should think about this. Who do I spend my time with? Am I really just spending my time with all of these people who are just fallen into the celebrity and idolatry of the world? Or am I spending my time with the people who are righteous before God and then gaining strength from one another and finding those people that have not bowed the knee to Baal, right? And so, this is the question I had to ask myself. I first came to faith. You guys have said my testimony many times that I came to faith when I was in college. I was a third year in college. And so this was very difficult. While all my friends were drinking and partying and all these kinds of things. But, really, asking myself, who am I spending my time with? Right? I mean, who am I really with? And isn't, all of these things that we're looking at in the world, they're all meaningless, and I must find people like me. People who, cutting through all the junk in the world, all the fake things in the world. And so, that's why I came to church. That's why I spent more and more time here at church is to be with people that see through it all and see the truth that is in the Bible, not out there in the world, but see the truth that is in the Bible, right? Through Jesus, right? So let's continue on. Let's look at the final part in 1 Kings chapter 19 and in verse 19 through 21. 1 Kings chapter 19 and in verse 19 through verse 21. So Elijah went from there and found Elisha, son of Shaphat. He was plowing with the 12 yoke of oxen, and he himself was driving the 12th pair. Elijah went up to him and threw his cloak around him. Elisha left his oxen and ran after Elijah. "Let me kiss my father and mother goodbye," he said, "and then I will come with you." "Go back," Elijah said. "What you have done, or what have I done to you?" So Elisha left him and went back. He took his yoke of oxen and slaughtered them. He burned the plowing equipment and to cook the meat and gave it to the people, and they ate. And he set out to follow Elijah and became his attendant. So the very last part we see here is the calling of Elisha. So he was a great farmer. In fact, when Elijah found him, Elisha was plowing with 12 oxen, in front of him. So, think about it. That's a pretty big scale, right? I mean, you have 12, oxen in front of you, and then you alone are plowing, with those 12 oxen. And so that's what Elijah was doing at the time. I think he was a person of a very great big scale, but he wasn't, he was just farming though. I mean, even though he had this big scale, he was simply farming. And so what did God do? God turned this person. He was just a farmer, right? He was just a farmer. He turned him into a great prophet, right? And so that is how God is. God, he turned the fishermen disciples, Jesus, he turned the fishermen disciples into fisher of men, the great apostles and evangelists that we see in the book of Acts. And so Elijah was a historic prophet of the Old Testament. He was the one that stood against nations and kings even. And so, the ministry of Elijah, how did the ministry in the prophet Elijah, how did his ministry continue to stand against nations and stand against kings? Well, it was this farmer. It was this farmer who continued that history. But, when you think about it, how great of a history is that, right? It shows God's power of transformation in us. Actually, we are already prepared. We already have abilities and capabilities, and we have a big scale, just like Elisha did. He had the capability. God already had blessed him with that blessing. He was already plowing with the 12 oxen. It was just, where is the focus? What are you really doing? Are you just going to farm, or are you going to be a great prophet before God? And so he called Elisha like this, and God transformed this person. And it was not by human power, but it was divine power that really did this, right? God took this farmer and transformed him and changed him, right? And so that's what we have to see. We have to see that it is the power of God's transformation in our life that allows us to bring glory to him. God has a glory. God does have a place in which he wishes to bring us, but it's not that, we're somehow, it's like by our own ability and power, but it's by God loving us and nurturing us and calling us in this way. Let's look at 1 Kings chapter 2, and 1 Corinthians chapter 2, 1 Corinthians chapter 2, and in verse 1 through 5. So it's just after Romans, so let's look at 1 Corinthians chapter 2, and in verse 1 through 5. When I came to you, brothers, I did not come with eloquence or superior wisdom as I proclaimed to you the testimony of God. For I resolved to know nothing while I was still with you except Jesus Christ and him crucified. I came to you in weakness and in fear with much trembling. My message and my preaching were not with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, so that your faith might not rest on man's wisdom, but on God's power. So why is this? Why is it a demonstration of the Spirit's power? It's so that it might not rest, it might not be to our glory and capability, but it is to a demonstration of the Spirit's power. It is to show God and reveal his power, right? And so, this type of transformation, to be in God and to be, this is what is a true, genuine transformation. I can transform myself. I try and we try to do that, to transform ourselves. But what often happens, we revert back to our old habits and our old ways. This is how it is, right? But where is a genuine and true transformation in God's truth and goodness? It is in God, right? It is he who transforms us genuinely. And so Elisha was changed from a farmer to this prophet. And this speaks to the potential that we all have, that God prepares us and equips us. And he even provides us with the people that we need. Elisha needed Elijah. He starts off as the attendant for Elijah, right? That's how he starts off. And so, we come to find even for ourselves to, be changed and transformed, we also need this kind of spiritual mentorship as well also, right? We need, we need someone to help me, to teach me, to be my guide, and to really help me teach the Bible. This is really what, God, he provides us, brothers and sisters and teachers and pastors and whatnot, to guide us in faith like this. And so Elisha had this with Elijah. And at the same time, we need to look at Elijah's heart too, that he didn't think that he's going to live forever, I'm going to live forever, but he wanted to pass down that spiritual mantle to the next generation. And so there were people from the next generation that needed to come out. And so, I think about Elijah and Elisha, and I think, that's how our church needs to be as well also. We need to be the church that continually raises people, right? To pass down the spirit of the gospel that we have been raised in. And so, what does God do with the ones changed by this grace? God, we need to know that he uses them to change the world, right? And so when we have become transformed, when Jesus comes into our life and that my life is transformed, do you think that, I'm saved by Jesus and then, my life is just like here, just like standing and, I'm just happy and then just that's it? No, of course, God's going to call us for something greater. That's what's going on here, right? When you look at the Christian faith, this faith of salvation that we have, it's not just the faith that I am saved and then I'm just happy because I'm saved from my sin and that's it. Of course, that's really important, but there is such thing where I need to be born again, right? And then so, I'm born again in Jesus Christ, saved from my sin, but then, still, I must be born again. There's such thing like this, right? And then so, what is that? It is born again really to, what does God do calling these people? Elisha, for example, it's not just to, change him, but it is to use him to change the world. Right? That is what it's about. It is to use God's people to be used to restore this world to God's kingdom. That, when we look at this world, it is so unlivable. It's so wretched living in this world. We're just born into this world, and it's just sad, actually. It's actually sad when you really think about it. You're born, you have a baby, and the baby's so beautiful, but the baby is born into this wretched world because it's just so wretched and it's unlivable. And do you think God just wants to leave the world in this unlivable way it is? No. He wants to change this world. And then when you think about it, how is God going to change the world? How is he going to, really renew this world, right? Of course, he's going to work through the small remnant, right, that Paul is speaking about. Right? Just like he did in the Old Testament, he called the righteous one Noah. And then, after Noah, Abraham became the father of faith for a nation. And so it was through the nation. Do you think the nation of Israel was just like standing there as a nation just so that it could like be happy by itself? It was not. Just being by itself, like happy by itself, it actually didn't become like that. It became wretched and idolatrous just on its own. Always from the Old Testament, the will of God, even for the Israel and the temple, was for it to reach the world, to be the model nation, really, for the world, to bring all to a faith in Jesus Christ. And so, now, when you look at us as believers and as a church, do you think we're just like standing here just so that, we can be happy amongst one another? But no, it's that God wishes to call us for something greater, for something bigger. And that is his kingdom, right? And then so, the remnant. Actually there was a philosopher, a historian I should say, Alan Toynbee. He coined a term. He called it the creative minority. He observed this throughout history. It's not as if history changes because all of a sudden there's like a great massive amount of people that do something all together. People, they don't do that. You have a huge amount of people suddenly changing their mind altogether. But he observed, no, it's not like that. Actually, it's always a small minority, a creative minority, he called it, right? And so these small, influential, mustard seed-like people, they made great influence. They made the change inside of the world. And so, he observes that as a historian, but, actually that's all biblical. That's all how God is. God has always worked like that throughout the Bible. He used one man, his son, Jesus Christ, to change the whole world by carrying the cross. And he used his fishermen disciples, a very handful of very small people that, like mustard seed, could have been blown away after Jesus died, resurrected, and ascended. These small, tiny people could have just blown away immediately. But no, he used them to really change the world, right? As it's recorded in Acts. And so, isn't it the same thing now? It is the same thing now. It is not about the massive amount of people. But it is about Elijah and Elisha and Jehu and these people and the 7,000 who have not bowed down to Baal. And so, for us, that's what I hope we can ask ourselves. Are we, one of these people called by grace of Jesus Christ and the Holy Spirit? Are we one of the 7,000 who have not bowed down to Baal? I hope we can not feel lonely in this world, but be comforted that there are brothers and sisters and the righteous ones around us, that our church can be this kind of church. And God could use us as a demonstration of the Spirit's power to be revealed and to bring thy kingdom come here on earth as it is in heaven. I wish we can be the ones that are called by God in this way. Let's pray. Father God, we thank you, Lord, for your loving grace. You are with us, you call us, and you are always so gracious towards us, Lord, even during the most difficult times when it seems like everything is upon me and it seems like, everything, we're in spiritual crisis, Lord, but you are there with a small whisper and giving us comfort at that time, Lord, and we thank you. And Lord, may we gain renewed strength to look beyond the sinful, depraved things of this world, but be used greatly, not in the mundane things of the world, but used greatly for your kingdom, Lord. And so please, Lord, being called as the 7,000 who have not bowed the knee to Baal, that have not fallen into the idolatry of the world, Lord, may we gain strength from one another as brothers and sisters, and be used to make a great change and to live for your glory in your kingdom. In Jesus Christ's name I pray. Amen.